The Supreme Council of the Vaari Dominion stood in eerie silence, their elongated crystalline forms reflecting the dim blue glow of the holographic display before them. The air was thick with disbelief. The footage they were watching defied every calculation, every doctrine, and every certainty they had held about humanity. A mere standard cycle ago, the Dominion had launched their final overwhelming assault on Earth's last line of defense. By all logic, humanity should have collapsed. Their fleets were primitive, their weapons crude, their biological durability laughable compared to the Vaari's regenerative, exoskeletal physiology. And yet, the hologram flickered, replaying the moment in slow motion. A single human soldier, battle-worn, injured, his armor cracked and his body bleeding, stood against an entire Vaari strike force. He had no energy shield, no plasma rifle, only a scavenged enemy weapon and sheer unwavering defiance. The Vaari General beside the Supreme Chancellor hissed in frustration. This is impossible. He should not have been able to hold the line. The Chancellor's 6 amber eyes narrowed. Observe. The footage zoomed in. The human was not just fighting, he was winning. He moved unpredictably, compensating for his wounds, adapting to Vaari combat strategies in real time. He anticipated their strikes before they even made them, and when the Vaari warriors attempted their final charge, expecting the human to falter, he did something that made the entire council freeze in horror. He smiled, a grim, bloodied grin, void of fear. Then he activated a detonator. The screen erupted in light as an entire section of the battlefield collapsed, not because of desperation, but because he had lured them into a trap. The Dominion's forces were obliterated, their superior numbers reduced to nothing in the span of a heartbeat. The Chancellor slowly exhaled, turning his gaze away from the hologram. We dismissed their warnings. We called them weak. We believed their threats of resistance were empty words. He leaned forward, his voice colder than the vacuum of space. We were wrong. The room remained silent. No one dared speak. And then, a quiet voice from the back of the chamber murmured the unthinkable. Is it possible we have already lost? The Vaari Dominion had ruled the stars for over 10 millennia. Empires had risen and fallen under their cold, calculated rule, and no species had ever withstood their conquest. They were not merely warriors, they were architects of domination, masters of subjugation, and unrivaled tacticians. Their strength lay not just in their superior technology, but in their absolute certainty that no primitive race could ever stand against them. And yet the humans had not only stood, they had fought back. Worse, they had won battles they had no right to win. The Supreme Council chamber was a place of solemn deliberation, a grand hall lined with crystalline spires that resonated with the thoughts of the Dominion's greatest strategists. Today, however, it was filled with uncertainty. The Chancellor's words hung in the air, the implications too terrible to ignore. General Zatheon, the Dominion's highest-ranking war commander, finally broke the silence. His 6 jointed fingers curled into a fist as he glared at the holographic battlefield. This is an anomaly, nothing more. One human soldier does not change the outcome of an empire-spanning war. Anomaly? Chancellor Valos turned his sharp gaze toward Zatheon. The humans have been anomalies in every engagement. They do not break like the others. They do not surrender when all logic dictates they should. They continue to fight long after their bodies should have failed them. He gestured toward another holographic recording. It showed a human fleet, outnumbered, outgunned, and crippled from previous battles, managing to execute a maneuver so reckless, so suicidal, that the Dominion's forces had hesitated for a crucial moment. That moment had cost them an entire. Sector-Dr. Zatheon bared his fangs. They are irrational. The Chancellor's voice remained cold. They are unpredictable, and that makes them dangerous. The war had begun as all Dominion conquests did, with a warning, a simple, elegant transmission sent to Earth, translated into human languages with clinical precision. Surrender, and your species will be granted a place within the Dominion. Resist, and you will be eradicated. For thousands of years, that message had been the prelude to the fall of countless civilizations. Some had fought briefly, but all had crumbled. But humanity had not responded with submission. They had sent back a single message of their own: try us. At first, the Dominion had laughed. Humanity's technology was primitive, their fleets nothing but scraps of metal compared to the Dominion's armadas. Their soldiers lacked the regenerative abilities of the Vaari, and their worlds were weak, fragile specks in the vast expanse of space. So the Dominion had struck. The first battle should have ended the war. It did not. The humans fought back with a ferocity unseen in any other species. When their ships were destroyed, they rammed them into Dominion vessels. When their cities were bombarded, they turned the rubble into weapons. They sabotaged, they infiltrated, they adapted. They made use of Dominion technology in ways the Vaari had never considered. They learned, and worst of all, they refused to die when they were supposed to. Counselor Vrex, a strategist who had studied every conquered species, finally spoke. "We miscalculated," she admitted. "We assumed humanity would fight like the others, that they would seek to preserve themselves, that they would prioritize survival over victory." Zatheon scoffed. "All species prioritize survival. Not humans." She gestured toward another recording, one taken from the ruins of a Dominion forward base. A squad of human soldiers, outnumbered and surrounded, had fought not to escape, but to delay the enemy. They knew they would die. They did not care. Their only concern was ensuring their allies had time to set a trap. Every single one of them had perished, but in doing so, they had destroyed an entire Dominion fleet. "We have mistaken them for another primitive species," Vrex continued. "But they are something else entirely." Zathion's mandibles clicked in irritation. "We still have the advantage." "Do we?" The Chancellor's voice was quiet. "They have done something no species has ever done before, Zathian. They have made the Dominion doubt itself. That was the true danger, not the battles lost, not the casualties mounting. It was the creeping realization that the Dominion might not be as invincible as they had always believed." Velos turned to the assembled council. "Our intelligence suggests that humanity is preparing something. A final stand, or perhaps something worse. We ignored their first warning." His 6 amber eyes gleamed darkly. "We will not ignore the second." The Dominion was a machine of war, relentless and systematic. Every conquered world had followed a precise pattern: initial shock and awe, strategic decimation, and a swift assimilation of survivors. Their superiority had never been questioned. Until now, humanity had not only survived, they had adapted. Every battle, every setback, every defeat had only made them smarter. And now, as the Dominion's warships advanced toward what they believed to be the final stronghold of the human resistance, there was an unease rippling through the ranks of the Vaari military. They had ignored the first warning. They were about to learn what happened when humanity was truly cornered. The Dominion's fleet emerged from subspace, above Tartarus III, a desolate fortress world where humanity's forces had supposedly retreated. The Vaari expected a desperate last stand, a futile attempt to delay the inevitable. Instead, they found nothing. No fleets, no planetary defenses activated. The world was silent, an abandoned husk. Admiral Zatheon stood aboard the Vindicator, the Dominion's flagship, staring at the tactical readout in confusion. "Where are they?" he growled. A junior officer hesitated. "Scans indicate underground tunnels, but no energy signatures, no signs of life." Zathion's mandibles tightened. This was wrong. Humans did not flee. They had proven that time and time again. They were not cowards. So, why was the world so empty? Something felt off, and then the first explosion erupted. Out of nowhere, Tartarus III's barren plains opened up. Giant underground silos, concealed beneath layers of dust and debris, emerged with terrifying precision. What the Dominion had believed to be an abandoned planet was, in reality, an enormous trap. Hundreds of human warships, hidden beneath the planetary crust, launched simultaneously in a synchronized counterattack. But they weren't engaging in direct combat. Instead, they disappeared, vanishing into subspace before the Dominion's fleet could react. Zatheon snarled, "Cowards! They run from battle." "No," one of his strategists interrupted, horror in their voice. "They're not running, they're cutting off our retreat." Realization struck like a thunderclap. The human fleet had used Tartarus III as bait, forcing the Dominion's forces to commit everything to this battle. Now, the Dominion's fleet was trapped in this sector, unable to escape. And that's when the Dominion's fleet received the human transmission. It was not a surrender. It was not a plea for peace. It was laughter, mocking, triumphant laughter, followed by a single message. "We warned you. The humans had always been outgunned. Their ships lacked the energy shielding of Dominion war vessels. Their weapons were crude in comparison to Vaari plasma technology. But humanity had something else, something the Dominion had failed to anticipate. They understood war like no other species in the galaxy. For humans, war was not a ritual. It was not an unfortunate necessity. It was a science, perfected across thousands of years of internal conflicts, adaptations, and reinventions. They had studied war in ways no species had, understanding strategy, deception, and psychological warfare on levels the Dominion had never encountered. And they had just put all of that knowledge into action. The real battle wasn't happening in space. It was happening in the Dominion's minds. As the Vaari forces scrambled to reposition, the human fleet did not engage. They did something far worse. They jammed Dominion communications. They hacked into navigation relays. They turned the Dominion's own fleets against each other by feeding them false data, making them fire on their own allies. And worst of all, they broadcasted every failure, every defeat, every moment of chaos across the entire Dominion Empire. For the first time in history, the invincible Vaari war machine was seen faltering. Their civilians, their lesser commanders, their entire civilization saw something they had never witnessed before. Doubt. The Dominion's warships, once the embodiment of terror, became confused and divided. Some commanders, unable to communicate, assumed betrayal and turned on each other. Others tried to regroup, only to find their own navigation systems sending them into human minefields. The Vindicator, the proudest ship in the Dominion's history, was disabled before it even fired a single shot. Human commandos, using salvaged Dominion technology, had infiltrated the ship's systems long before the battle began. And then, Tartarus III's surface detonated. The entire planet had been rigged for destruction. It was never meant to be defended. It was meant to be a weapon. A shockwave of electromagnetic interference surged through the battlefield, disabling Dominion shields and leaving their ships vulnerable. And only then, only after the Dominion had been broken, humiliated, and shattered, did the human fleet attack. They did not fight with desperation, they fought with certainty, because this battle had been won before it even began. On the Vindicator, Zatheon could only watch in horror as everything unraveled. How? His voice trembled. How did they know? How did they plan this? The answer came from an intercepted human transmission played back over the failing communication systems of the Dominion fleet. It was a human general's voice, calm and measured. "You thought we'd fight your way. You thought we'd come at you head-on, hoping to win by brute force. You still don't understand what we are." We're not stronger than you, we're not faster, we don't have better weapons. But we are smarter, and we learn. The transmission cut out, replaced by the sounds of Dominion ships being torn apart. Zatheon, once the proudest warrior in the Dominion, sank to his knees. For the first time in his life, he felt something no Vaari had ever felt before. Fear. The Dominion had ignored humanity's warning. Now they were paying the price. The Vindicator trembled under the weight of its own demise. Fires raged through. The once impenetrable flagship, its corridors filled with the screams of Vaari officers as they scrambled in vain to re-establish control. The ship's command systems had been hijacked, its weapon arrays turned into lifeless husks, and its shields were offline, completely exposed to the human assault. Admiral Zatheon clutched the console before him, his claws tightening with the sheer frustration of a warlord who had never lost, never even considered the possibility of defeat. Yet here he stood, watching his empire fall apart, not from overwhelming firepower, but from something far worse. They had been outthought. The humans had never intended to win in a conventional war. Their technology was inferior, their numbers were smaller, their forces should have been crushed within months of the invasion. And yet, battle after battle, they had adapted, countered, and turned weaknesses into strengths. Their minds were their true weapons. And now, that weapon had broken the Vaari Dominion. "Sir," one of Zathion's officers, a younger warrior with shattered mandibles, turned in panic. "The second wave of human warships has arrived. We cannot hold them back." A sudden explosion rocked the flagship as a barrage of human railgun fire tore through its outer hull. The impact sent Zatheon sprawling against the command dais, the taste of his own ichor flooding his mouth. Alarms screamed through the bridge. Red emergency lights flickered. The warlord's breath was ragged. His mind reeled. He had never felt like this before. Trapped, powerless, helpless. The Vindicator's sensors flickered to life, displaying the impossible sight before him. The once great Dominion fleet, the pinnacle of 10,000 years of conquest, had been reduced to drifting wreckage. What ships remained were retreating, but the humans had already anticipated this. They had sealed off every escape route. There was no way out. The realization hit like a collapsing star. This is it. The Dominion was not losing this battle. It was dying. Across the war-torn battlefield, a single human vessel approached the failing Vindicator. It was not the largest of their ships, nor the most powerful, and yet its presence demanded attention, because it was broadcasting a message, not just to the remnants of the Dominion fleet, but to every surviving Vaari colony across the stars. A human voice, calm, unwavering, filled the bridge of the Vindicator, carried across the dying embers of the war. "This is General Elias Kaney of the United Terran Command." Zathion's breath hitched. That name. He had heard it before, whispered among Dominion officers in hushed tones. The butcher of Corran Fief, the ghost of Nova Prime, the human who had orchestrated more Dominion defeats than any other. And now he spoke with the certainty of a being who already knew how this would end. "You called us primitive." The transmission echoed across the collapsing empire. "You called us weak." A beat of silence. The only sound was the distant groans of ruptured metal and failing systems. "You should have listened when we warned you." Zathian felt the weight of his sins. Every civilization they had conquered, every world they had burned, every species that had bowed beneath the Dominion's boot. And now, the ones they had dismissed, the ones they had deemed too insignificant to take seriously, had brought it all to ruin. Kaney's voice was steady. "The Dominion ends today." Then, without hesitation, the human commander issued a single command: "Fire!" A wall of light erupted from the human fleet, a perfectly coordinated barrage of kinetic rounds, missile swarms, and energy blasts. The first impact cracked the Vindicator's hull like glass. The second tore into its engines, sending the once mighty flagship into an uncontrolled spiral. Zatheon could only watch as his ship, his empire's pride, was reduced to nothing but debris and fire. A final, crushing explosion consumed the bridge. Then, darkness. Across the galaxy, Vaari civilians watched in stunned silence as the final moments of the Dominion's greatest fleet played out in real time. For the first time in their history, they saw something they had never imagined possible. The Vaari had lost. The Dominion, an empire that had lasted millennia, had been defeated by a species they had mocked as unworthy of even their concern. And now their entire civilization had been thrown into chaos. Factions splintered. Some sought to flee into the darkness of space, hoping to escape humanity's wrath. Others whispered of surrender, of peace, of a future where the Vari would no longer be conquerors. But the truth was undeniable. The strongest empire in the galaxy had fallen, and it had fallen because they had ignored a simple human warning. The war was over. Across the galaxy, the once mighty Vaari Dominion lay in ruins. Their fleets were shattered, their ruling councils dead or in disarray. The empire that had conquered worlds with cold efficiency had been undone, not by overwhelming force, but by something far deadlier: human ingenuity. On Earth, celebrations erupted across the planet. Cities that had once burned under Dominion bombardments now echoed with cheers. Survivors of the war, soldiers, engineers, refugees, stood side by side, knowing that humanity had achieved the impossible. But in orbit above Tartarus III, there was no celebration. General Elias Kaney stood on the bridge of the UTS Vengeance, staring at the debris field that had once been the Vindicator, a ship that had represented an empire. Now it was little more than floating wreckage, its charred remains serving as a warning to any who still doubted what humanity was capable of. A junior officer approached him. "Sir, reports are coming in. The Dominion's core worlds are in total disarray. Some are surrendering outright. Others are fracturing into warlord states." Kaney didn't react. His gaze remained fixed on the void, where thousands of Dominion warships had once stood. The officer hesitated. "What are your orders, sir?" Kaney exhaled slowly. "Send out a message," he said, "to every surviving Vaari leader, every world that still clings to the idea of an empire." The transmission was sent across. The remains of the Dominion, the surviving Vaari, generals, governors, scattered remnants of a once mighty empire, listened as the voice of the man who had destroyed them echoed across their shattered communications networks. "This war is over. Silence. You have a choice. Surrender now, and humanity will allow your people to rebuild. Resist, and there will be nothing left of your worlds but dust." The message was clear. Humanity did not seek conquest. They had never wanted war, but they would not allow the Dominion, or anything like it, to rise again. For the first time, the Vaari understood. They had mistaken human warnings for weakness. They had mistaken human kindness for cowardice. Now, they understood the truth. Humanity was not to be underestimated, and the galaxy would never forget. Months later, a diplomatic summit was held on New Europa, a space station that had once been a battleground and was now the site of the first peace negotiations between humanity and the remnants of the Dominion. The surviving Vaari leaders, those who had chosen to accept humanity's terms rather than be annihilated, stood before representatives of Earth and its allies. There was no arrogance in them anymore, no condescension, only respect, and for the first time, fear. Kaney stood at the head of the human delegation, his expression unreadable. "This is your last chance," he said calmly. "You can rebuild as equals in this galaxy, or you can vanish into history as a lesson in arrogance." The Vaari diplomats exchanged glances. They did not argue. They did not threaten. One by one, they bowed their heads in submission, and with that, the strongest empire in the galaxy was no more. Humanity had not just survived. They had changed the fate of the stars forever.